What's up, guys? It's one of those moments where I uploaded a video for you today, and it dealt with the linebacker position like I've been saying. I've been telling you guys that I fully expected Nigel Bradham to be cut. I do a lot of talking here where I say I would have cut Nigel Bradham. And, guys, it's 1:56, and about 30 minutes ago, seems like Nigel Bradham was indeed released from the Philadelphia Eagles. So I just wanted to provide a little context for this video before y'all jump in. So without further ado, enjoy the video, guys. Just wanted to make sure y'all knew what was going on with that. What's up, Eagles Nation? What's going on, NFL world? How you doing, division rivals? This is Steven Hyder with Gate City Sports Channel, the sports channel where the cerebral NFL fan comes for about 10 minutes of daily content. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching, guys. Once again, Steven Hyder, Gate City Sports Channel. Guys, listen, if you are new to the channel, this is maybe the first or second video you've watched, and you like the content, guys, do me a big solid if you could. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's what keeps YouTubers motivated. It's what keeps us getting out here on almost a daily basis and putting out content for you to consume, guys. It helps a lot. Number two, to all my old G's, you already know what I'm going to ask you to do. Hit that thumbs up button. That's the button that tells YouTube that we are a community. We converse, we talk, you guys react to videos. And then in return, YouTube takes this, content and then pushes it out amongst all of YouTube. All right, y'all. So today's video, we're going to, I pretty much summed it up yesterday as I closed out. We're going to continue upon this idea of tying it all together with the linebackers. So today, guys, what I really want to talk about is the free agency market, the draft, and then maybe the late draft or even rookie free agent market that could come to try to resolve the issues we're having at linebacker. And we've talked quite extensively, as a community here about how much the game has changed at linebacker and the fact that you've got to be very creative now when you're playing linebacker, because we're really going more to the sub package sets on, 60, 70, 80% of snaps now. So you're playing a lot of two-backer sets, and in the Eagles situation, we play a lot of nickel, or we'll play a lot of big, nickel, or we'll play a lot of dime. So you're adding more defensive backs to the field. So you need guys who can either be these in-betweener linebackers that are athletic enough to cover and still kind of play a linebacker role, or you're going to need stronger, more physical, tough, minded, strong safeties who can really come down in the box and give you kind of a three safety package where you're constantly using these guys. So today's topic, guys, let's tie it all together and let's round out linebacker, guys. All right, let's jump into the content, guys.
Once I B gap, but then I see the puller, so I know.
As I think of the Philadelphia Eagles linebacker situation, there's a few things that run through my mind. The first thing has to do with these three players you see. Okay, we have a young, undrafted rookie free agent from last year in TJ Edwards, who, to many, didn't really surprise, but to others, he surprised us. He played a lot better than we anticipated. So where we're really stuck is thinking to ourselves, can this kid fit our scheme? Is he the next kind of big thing in Philadelphia? The second guy you see on this list, I believe, was also an undrafted rookie free agent. He was a young guy who's come in, run through that course of that contract, and now we're stuck here with him coming off of an injury. He wasn't healthy for the majority of the 2019 season. There were reports early on in training camp that he was the best linebacker we had in the system. But once again, we're getting into this weird thing. At least TJ Edwards, we know, is a Mike in this league. He's a Mike linebacker. When you look at a guy like, Kamu Grugier-Hill, I'm sorry, but to me, that's a will. That is a will linebacker. I do not think he possesses the skill set to play the Mike. Now, you come to the third guy, a guy that I once thought was a really good signing for the Philadelphia Eagles. I've been a huge fan of Nigel Bradham's. I respect everything he did and everything he helped contribute to that Super Bowl run. With that said, look, the reality is the reality. And this is an older, expensive player. And that's what I want to transition into, because if we're going to talk about all the things that comes along with the Philadelphia Eagles, then let's start breaking down exactly what we're talking about, what the options are, and where we go. So let's start with Nigel Bradham's contract, because I think that's the first thing that has to be discussed in this entire scenario here. All right, ladies and gents. On March 15th, 2018, sorry about that initial error, Nigel Bradham agreed to renegotiate his contract. Okay. He ended up signing a 5-year, $40 million contract with $8 million in signing bonuses. Now, the guarantees of that contract, sometimes, guys, this money means crap. It's all about the guarantees. So the guarantees of the contract were $5 million of that $8 million signing bonus, $1 million of his 2018 salary would be guaranteed, $2 million of his 2019 salary would be guaranteed. And then also, if he was on the roster during the 5th day of the calendar, or the league year, basically what they mean by that, of 2019, he would then have a $6 million injury guarantee. So basically, this was Nigel Bradham's restructuring, if you will, of his renegotiation, not restructuring, renegotiation of his contract. But it didn't end there, because 1 year later in 2019, we were back again up against the cap talking to Nigel Bradham, just because we were never going to pay him that initial contract he signed. Now let's get into what the restructuring of his contract looked like. Fast forward, everyone, to this past offseason, and once again, we were back asking him to restructure the contract. And we did this basically in order to free up $4.365 million in cap space. If you guys remember, we were really up close on the cap last season, and Howie really had to work some magic to free up enough cap space to go out there and target people. So, Howie Roseman, once again, he restructures Nigel's contract. Now, the way the guarantees of the contract worked out, so basically made it worth Nigel Bradham's worthwhile, was they added $4 million in additional guaranteed money. Basically, they had originally only guaranteed $5 million of that signing bonus, so they add another $3 million to a signing bonus, so basically guaranteeing that $8 million if you really look at it in that way. And that was $3 of the $4 million of guaranteed money they added back. Now, there was $1 million in additional playing bonuses that Nigel could earn. Basically, it was done through like per game basis. So per game basis, there was incentives built in that could equal up to $1 million. He missed some time, so I highly doubt he made that full $1 million, but nonetheless, it was in there. And then basically, his cap numbers would work out so that way in 2020 through 2022, everything would stay the same. And that lies the problem, because I just can't see a reality where we pay Nigel Bradham almost $10 million in base salary alone. I mean, his base salary alone is like $8 million. Like, there's just no way, guys. I can't see that happening. So let's talk about the realities of the situation now. The reality of the situation is we currently have 5 linebackers who are still technically under contract. However, I'm not going to really talk much about Alex Singleton, just because I feel like he's a very good special teams player. But the reality of the matter is he's a bottom of the roster guy, and he's very susceptible to roster change at this point. So, not saying that he wouldn't be back, he wouldn't have a role, especially as that special teams player, but I think he's the most susceptible to change right now. With that said, look, the reality of the situation is this. You got a guy playing the mic who's out of place. He's a Sam linebacker. In our system, we just don't use Sam linebackers anymore. It's very rare we bring a guy in to play the Sam. And the one guy that I see play the Sam often as a linebacker in a 43 adjusted set it happens to be Nathan Gary, who's a former safety. So it's still kind of like we're running the big nickel, honestly. He doesn't really have a fit or a home here positionally. He's out of place playing the mic, which is why I do tend to give some leniency towards Nigel Bradham, because he's been a team guy and he's taken that role on. But I just have the feeling that at this point he's going to retard, meaning to regress, TJ Edwards' progression as a football player, his development as a football player. And I think it's time that TJ Edwards got a chance to play that Mike linebacker, or we upgrade there, and that's the other side to this. So, what I want to show you real quick is just a clip of exactly the way the Eagles like to run their defense. Their first down defense generally comes out, it looks just like this. This is the very first play of the season against the Washington Redskins. All right, ladies and gents, like I said, very first play of the NFL season, Philadelphia Eagles came out, in a sub-package nickel cover 3 concept, okay? So you got off coverage by the corners. You got your free safety, Rodney McLeod, as your center fielder. So he's your deep safety. And then you got a sub-package that includes Malcolm Jenkins as your Sam. So look, the Eagles to me are kind of positionless with the Sam and the Will. They don't give a crap. But the difference between Sam and the Will is simply put, guys, the Sam, generally speaking, lines up on the strong side of the offensive line. So he's over to where you got a tight end or something like that. And then the Will's on the weak side of the offensive line. When a team goes kind of balanced, so if it goes kind of a nickel, or not nickel, I'm sorry, guys, if it goes kind of a slot, what you'll see the Will do is the Will then will come outside of the tackle, so it'll be between the tackle and that slot receiver. It's generally speaking a good idea to tell who's your Will linebacker. So in this particular alignment and setup, guys, what you can see is you have a Sam linebacker who happens to be, as part of your nickel. That's going to be Malcolm Jenkins, which is very common. You got a Mike, which happens to be Nigel Bradham. And then your Will for the opening play of the season was Zach Brown, who was one of our free agent acquisitions who, of course, you guys know the story. He didn't quite make it. So you also have a nickelback in here, which is part of that, nickel package, which to me looks like Avonte Maddox. So your defensive lineman, you got, it looks like on your left cornerback, it looks like to me that's Darby, and then your right cornerback, that looks like, crap, I can't tell from here, guys, but your right cornerback, I think, is Rasul Douglas from this picture. But if I can see the video instead of the picture, I'll be able to know for sure. But looks like Rasul is your right cornerback. Basic stuff. This is how the Eagles like to play. So you got to have linebackers that fit this. So now, the question really is, amongst the linebackers we have, I've already advocated, guys, and I think it's time to give TJ Edwards a crack at your Mike. I think TJ Edwards could play the Mike. I think if you had to play him at the Will, I think TJ Edwards could play the Will, no doubt about it, but I do think he's a better Mike. I think it's time to give TJ Edwards that opportunity. I think it's time to shed ourselves to that Nigel Bradham contract. The question becomes, you got a guy like Nathan Gary, who I think is better suited, once again, to be a Sam. I don't know that Nathan Gary is going to be that great in the Will. That would be a bit of an experiment. You could definitely go into a situation where you got, Nathan Gary as your Will, and you got TJ Edwards as your Mike, and then you got your safety coming down and playing that, kind of role as your Sam. The other question here has to do with Malcolm Jenkins, because if Jenkins is out, then I think that it's a natural slot to then move and play a lot more base package 43. Because you got a guy like Nathan Gary who's basically a safety already coming down in that box anyways. Now, with that said, I think the really question becomes, when you look at free agency, are you adding guys to take over the Mike and you're still not trusting, TJ Edwards in that Mike position? We're talking about free agency. Are you adding a guy who could challenge at the Mike, but maybe he's going to play more of the Will beside TJ Edwards? Or, where do you go with this? Like, where does your belief fall into it? Are you just adding guys to compete with them, but hoping that TJ Edwards comes out to be the victor here? That's really where the question revolves for me. So here's my proposal of what the options are, and I'll kind of throw them on the screen, and let's have a conversation about those free agency ads and what they could do. And I've covered this stuff in detail, guys. I think the first situation, scenario, maybe even deem it the most likely situation or scenario is, to begin with, the Eagles find a way of working out this situation with Malcolm Jenkins. And by no means, guys, do I think that any of this is a lock. I do think that there has been somewhat of an impasse reach with Malcolm Jenkins here, and I wouldn't turn a blind eye to us parting ways. I don't think that's a guarantee the way I would have thought it 2 or 3 months ago. So right now, it has my attention, but I still think the smart move for the Eagles is to figure this thing out. Then you elevate and you promote TJ Edwards to that Mike position, which basically would mean that part of the way you're going to free up money to probably get Malcolm Jenkins back on this roster is by letting go of Nigel Bradham. Let's just be honest. We all kind of know that's probably the likely outcome of how that would probably go down. Now you got the young kid at your Mike. You got the guy that's playing that kind of hybrid safety / Sam and young kid. Wow. You got the young kid at the Mike, and then you got the veteran playing that hybrid safety / Sam and Malcolm Jenkins. And then I know this isn't the move people want to see, but if the Eagles are truly high and truly believe in the talents of Kamu Grugier-Hill, you're signing back at a low-cost rate to play the Will. Now, I see some issues with Kamu Grugier-Hill coming back too, because I got to tell you, it looks like the Eagles had an impasse with him. It just the circumstances seem funny around him. It looked like the Eagles, organization was genuinely pissed off about the non-reporting of the injury. Not long after that, we find out that he's basically not playing that many snaps, and then from there it goes into basically he's out for the year on IR. Like, I'd keep my eye on that situation. I don't think that this scenario is a lot to occur as I thought it would have been in years past. Okay. But I could definitely see a situation to where you got Malcolm Jenkins playing that safety Sam kind of hybrid system with TJ Edwards playing your Mike, and then you got your Will being Kamu Grugier-Hill. Now, the part I think sells this is this part of it. Now you got your third, fourth reserve linebacker, however you want to look at this, and Nathan Gerry, who I think is kind of a unique guy, that where he's basically a heavier built now muscular, safety playing down in the box basically. So he can be the Sam in a traditional 43, or you can just look at it as if the Eagles are playing big nickel. He's basically taking the role of what the Eagles were doing early in the year, right? When we had the guy from Minnesota, his name slipping my mind right now, but you can look at that type of situation and say, like, hey, basically this is either 43 traditional Sam kind of situation, or this is a hybrid big nickel kind of situation. There's flexibility here, is what I'm saying. And I do think that even in this particular situation, my guess is the Eagles will provide a little more to safety support on the corners this upcoming year. So you'll see a little more of Nathan Gary, however you say his last name, playing more. All right. So scenario number one, guys. This is the first scenario I can envision and I can see. Guys, my second scenario would involve Howie Roseman, like, really, really sticking to his points in the press conference and really feeling like, hey, the age of this roster, it's too old, and we've got to clean house. Goodbye, Nigel Bradham. Goodbye, Malcolm Jenkins. We're not going to renegotiate that contract. We'll go ahead and cut you, and we'll part ways right now. In that situation, I could see the Eagles making and playing Nathan Gary at Sam a lot more often, using TJ Edwards, moving him over to the Will. He could still probably play the Mike with this guy. They're interchangeable, I think, between Will and Mike, but TJ Edwards would nonetheless be elevated and would play a lot more. And then I could see the Eagles making a moderate free agent splash. Okay. So this isn't like an over the top free agency splash, but this is a moderate free agency splash. It probably costs you 7 to 10 million per year, I would think, for this individual player, assuming his value doesn't escalate even further than that because of how crazy free agency can be sometimes. I could see the Eagles going out and getting a guy like Joe Schobert, taking Joe Schobert and putting him in this lineup as either your Mike or your Will, and TJ Edwards going beside him either as the Mike or the Will. And then you got Nathan Gary, who's basically a safety playing the Sam anyways, in there. Now, mind you, this would be a much larger overhaul because you're not done, because you would need a safety in this situation as well. But nonetheless, you can see where I'm going there. So I could see this being like kind of a scenario 2 type situation. My third scenario would be kind of a part A and a part B, just giving you a couple of different names. But in my third scenario, I could see the Eagles doing something like re-signing Malcolm Jenkins, getting that figured out, cutting Nigel Bradham, okay, letting TJ Edwards take over as the Mike, bringing in competition to either compete with TJ Edwards or to possibly play TJ Edwards at the Will or this individual at the Will. So bringing in a guy like David Mayo. And then going into the 2020 NFL draft and going and getting a guy with a lot of versatility and a dynamic football player who, if developed correctly, could be something really big down the line. So going and getting a guy like Akeem Davis Gaither, he would make a lot of sense to me. I think this scenario in general makes a lot of sense to me because I think it's the most cost effective. And I still think there's some, solid play here, and you get dynamic guys and you have competition because you still got Nathan Gary in that mix. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of guys in the mix still here. You got Duke Riley, who's a good special teams player. He's a former third round pick to add competition. Like, This, I do think, allows for a lot of competition. It's a cheaper alternative, and I do think it improves the actual linebacker room inside the Philadelphia Eagles. But I'm going to give you a part B to this. All right, guys, my last crack at being GM for the day. I'm going to give you my last case kind of scenario, and it's a part A and a part B to this to kind of how you can resolve this linebacker issue. And I'm sorry, but there's just no way of getting around solving the linebacker issue without really discussing the fact that you can't resolve the linebacker issue without first resolving the issues you have at safety. So part one of this would be, if we can't work out any, you just can't work the contract out with a player like, Nigel Bradham, you let him go. And then on top of that, we can't get things to work out with Malcolm Jenkins, you let him go. I think you have to then bring in, somebody who can solidify this secondary. And I would go for an Anthony Harris. Okay. Bring Anthony Harris in to fill in right at strong safety. All right. He's a couple years younger than Malcolm Jenkins. Of course, you're going to have the situation, 2-3 years, but at least you're buying yourself 2 or 3 years before that situation rears its ugly head again. And then I would advocate, after making a move like that, you're going to probably give TJ Edwards an opportunity to either play the Mike or the Will. So you can go into your part, the second part of this plan for part A in the draft. And you can go and draft a kid like, Malik Harrison out of Ohio State to come in and either challenge TJ Edwards at the Mike, or if the kid's that good, you give him the Mike responsibility. Maybe you have TJ Edwards move over to the Will. Maybe TJ Edwards could challenge someone like Kamu Grugier-Hill if you sign him back. So that way you're getting the most out of your money, guys, because decisions have to be made in the dollars. I mean, it's not Madden, guys. We're not building a team on Madden. There's money that has to actually be involved into this. So the next thing I could see the Eagles doing, same situation, right, to where they're bringing Harris, they're letting go Jenkins, they're letting go of Nigel Bradham. But this time, instead of going out and re-signing a guy like Kamu Grugier-Hill, you're signing, not re-signing, but you're signing a guy like Nick Kwiatkoski come in and compete. So Nick Kwiatkoski can come in and compete either at the Mike or the Will, all right? So you got someone to compete with TJ Edwards, okay? He's not going to break the bank on you. You've got some good, talent in that room, no matter who's starting. And then you go and you look for young guys in the draft. So you can go out there and you can search for a guy like Akeem Davis Gaither coming out of Appalachian State. He probably have to be in the late third into the fourth round for a guy like Akeem Davis Gaither to have an opportunity to sign a guy like that. Or maybe later in the draft, if you're really struggling to find a Will, then at the Will position, what you could do is simply go in and look for a guy like Chris Orr out of Ohio State and add Chris Orr in at the Will. So now you're not forced to rekindle this relationship with a guy like Kamu Grugier-Hill. You can go get yourself an Orr out of Wisconsin, or you go get yourself a Gaither out of App State, and then you can sign a guy like Nick Kwiatkoski to come in and compete at the Mike or the Will. TJ Edwards can compete at the Mike and the Will. You still got Nathan, Gary on this football team. You still got Duke Riley on this football team. And you're adding Harrison, Anthony Harris is a really, really talented football player. These are the types of scenarios I could see, the Philadelphia Eagles getting themselves into. Now, you might have noticed there's one guy who pops up on everything I'm talking about, and that's TJ Edwards. I think TJ Edwards really showed last year that he's a guy that should be in consideration for a starting role. And I'm just going to show you just a little clip of film of one of the games where just all game long, he just kept popping out to me. And I want to show you one play to where it just shows his ability versus the run. And he was a lot better versus the pass than anyone thought. I think it's time to get young at linebacker, and we might as well rip this Band-Aid off, guys, and get started, is my opinion on the situation. Moo is the Will, Edwards is the Mike, and Gary is your Sam. Hey, ladies and gents, my final thoughts here. If you want to pin me down and say, all right, Gate City, come on, man. You're giving us like a million different scenarios where they could. What would you do if you were the Eagles GM? This is not a prediction of what Howie Roseman will do. This is what I would do if I was the GM. My first instinct and thought process would be, I love Nigel Bradham. It's time to cut ways. He's 31 years old. He's lost a step. He's due almost $10 million. And by the way, he's due the same exact figure next year, and the following year goes up to like 11 something. It's time to cut that contract. We talked about getting younger, and I'm not saying you got to cut everyone of a certain age. Like, you got to have veterans on your football team. But somewhere along the way, you got to make difficult decisions. And unfortunately, that's one of the guys I would let go. The second step is I would do everything I can to resolve the situation with Malcolm Jenkins and get him back in this building for another couple of years. He knows the system. He's familiar with the system. He's reliable. He's dependable. Look, when he's at his best, he's a very good football player. Last year was a little eye-opening because I do think that there were a couple times I think we were asking him to do too much, and he got exposed a couple times in coverage. And I think we need to back down some of the responsibility of Malcolm Jenkins because I just don't think it's fair, and I think it's getting him to look like a worse football player than what he actually is. So I would try to work something out with Malcolm Jenkins. If I couldn't work it out with Malcolm Jenkins, and that's my first big free agency thing, is you've got to go find safeties. So first, cut Nigel Bradham, work out the situation with Malcolm Jenkins. And now I'll flip the script and I'll talk about if I could not work it out with Malcolm Jenkins, what would I do? And I'm talking about this in relation to the linebackers because, in my opinion, it's connected. So, my fear here, guys, if we miss, if we can't figure this contract situation out with Malcolm Jenkins, we are really going to be searching the draft heavily for strong safety help because I just think it opens up a whole can of worms. Now, look, there's a big free agent out there in Anthony Harris, who would be a really good football player to add to the Philadelphia Eagles. But we ain't going to be the only ones with interest, and that's if Minnesota can't find a way of keeping the guy retained on their team. Your other option, your best option past Anthony Harris, in my opinion, would be Von Bell. If you miss on Von Bell, man, the pool gets pretty shallow quickly, guys. Then you're dealing with like Tavon Wilson, Jeff Heath, like not very ideal situations. Your best case scenario, maybe you could work a deal out with a guy like Jalen Mills and bring him back as a strong. Maybe you could move Rasul Douglas to strong safety. I think both of these guys are better playing inside. I don't know if strong safety is their fit more than free safety, but you get what I'm saying. You really get yourself into trouble quickly. The ideal situation is to either get Anthony Harris or work this situation out with Malcolm Jenkins. Then you can focus your time and your effort on free safety. Then you can talk about those internal guys like Rasul Douglas and Jalen Mills, who both of them I think would make pretty good free safeties. You could talk about going and getting my favorite, which would be a Kendall Fuller to play free safety. A Trey Boston, who's another guy I like a lot. But you can't, you've got to resolve this safety issue or it will impact your linebackers as well. Because this can be a big, big problem going forward. I already think we have to address free safety because, look, no disrespect to anyone who's been on the team before, but we need a guy with better range than what we've had out of McLeod the last few years. It's just being honest and straightforward. So, got to resolve it there. But now let's switch gears. Let me talk about explicitly what I would do as the GM to address linebacker. Now that I've released Nigel Bradham, it's my first day as the general manager. Now, look, I like Nigel Bradham. I've always been a big fan of Nigel Bradham's, but it's hard when you get in these situations, but you do got to move on from guys. So you already know my first move is to let Nigel Bradham go. My second move is to figure out the strong safety situation. So that way we can figure out the rest of this linebacking core. And this is what I would do. Nigel Bradham's gone. Malcolm Jenkins is either back or we got Harris in his place. Now what I would do is I would give every opportunity possible to TJ Edwards to earn that Mike linebacker position. Okay? I would bring in an insurance policy. Look to TJ Edwards' left and look to his right. That's my insurance policy. I would either go after Nick Kwiatkoski or I would go after Mayo, David Mayo. One of those two guys I would bring in here as an insurance policy because they can compete both at the will and they compete at the mic. I think both of them are pretty good football players and would have a legitimate chance at actually earning a starting job here. Nonetheless, competition's always good. You want competition any way you can get it. The next thing I would do, guys, I know it's not a popular move, and I'm not talking about a long-term contract. I would probably bring Kamu Grugier-Hill back. because you don't want to be sitting there searching and seeking and really trying to guess what your opening day lineup is going to look like at the will. I don't think that's an ideal situation. I would probably sign him back for a year or two on the kind of a prove it deal, and I would go into the draft knowing I was going to have to address this situation. So my first priority here would probably be go after App State's Akeem Davis Gaither at the linebacker position. I would be heavily involved, and I would consider taking him in the third round, which I think is a round before his actual value. Because, look, when you get those supplemental picks, what you guys got to understand is the supplemental picks come at the end of the round. So that extra third rounder is really a early fourth rounder. Those two fourth rounders are really early fifth rounders, if depending on how you want to look at that situation. So with one of those third round picks, I'm probably targeting Akeem Davis Gaither. I'm probably going to do everything in my power to make sure that I can go get me a will linebacker that maybe I can build around the future. Because if I miss on that position, I'm in a lot of trouble. We all know the draft can take funny twists and turns. You might have every intention of drafting Gaither. So if someone jumps you and gets him, then what do you do? My plan B in the draft would be Chris Orr out of Wisconsin. So that's what I would do at the linebacker position. I'd bring in a free agent like, Kwiatkoski or Mayo. Okay. I would definitely give TJ Edwards a chance to start on this football team because I think he's a good football player. I would probably sign back a guy like Kamu Grugier-Hill, and I would probably target in the draft a guy like, Akeem Davis Gaither, or I would go after Orr. I would definitely target Orr out of Wisconsin, Chris Orr. That's what I would do personally. That's the moves I would make here to kind of reinforce this linebacker. And you still got guys like Nathan Gary who can compete. He's definitely can take snaps at the Sam, and he can also come in here and compete for time at the Mike and the Will. I think Nathan Gary can kind of be your utility knife, that guy that can play everything, guy that you can trust. That's what I would do. But now, let's talk about the question of the day, which is going to revolve around what you would do. All right, y'all. Let's jump into the question of the day. All right. Listen, this ain't going to be easy, guys. Pure question of the day. I want you to put yourself in Howie Roseman's shoes. You're the general manager. You need to remake this roster. All right. Your first question, your first priority. What moves would you make to improve the linebacker position? Tell me what they are in depth, guys. Some examples of what you could talk about. Would you start TJ Edwards? Would you make any free agent signings? And if you did, which ones would you make? And then lastly, give me your lineup. Who's your Sam? Who's your Mike? Who's your Will linebacker? How often are you going to be using, base packages like the 43? And how often are you going to be in those sub packages like the nickel? We tend to be more in our sub package. I mean, lots and lots more in our sub package. I mean, the whole league is trending that way. So that's why I said that the linebacker position is closely tied to safety. I mean, you get guys like, a Malcolm Jenkins, and he's basically playing as a starting linebacker in a way. You get guys like Nathan Gary, and he's basically a safety, or really back in the day, we used to call that a rover. He's a roving or a rover linebacker. Okay. You got to keep these things in mind when we're talking about Sam, Mike, and the Will. But that's it, guys. That's the content. Thank you all for watching. I know this was a long video, but these aren't easy decisions to make, guys. They're not. They involve players that I really like. And at some point, sacrifices got to be made, and a rebuilding process, the retooling process, has to begin. All right, y'all. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And oh, yeah, how do we close these videos? By going EAGLES. All right, y'all. Let's go, Eagles.